As promised, we're back with more broken abilities. In our previous video, we mentioned how there were so many of these that they could hardly fit into one. So here we continue chronicling some of Game Freak's most busted gifts, ranked in order from least to most broken. As a bonus, last time we did 10 of these abilities, but now we're upping the ante with 11. And so we're gonna jump right in with Poison Heal. Simply being poison immune already makes for quite a good ability. See the ability literally named Immunity, which is the standard choice on Gen 3 Snorlax, even though it also packs the ice and fire resisting thick fat, because being able to not just avoid threat from, but actually switch into opposing toxics is just that groundbreaking. Now, what if you weren't just toxic immune, but you actually gained health from being poisoned? Well, that's Poison Heal, which helped launch Breloom to stardom in Gen 4, then turned Gliscor into an unstoppable monster that somehow became more frightening over time with each generation. Indeed, Poison Heal is among the best tools in the game at giving you time. First of all, it doesn't just heal you by 6.25% per turn, just like Leftovers. No, it heals you at 12.5% a pop. Double Leftovers is already incredible, letting Gliscor do insane things like immediately heal off Stealth Rock and safely gain back 25% in 2 turns if running Protect, while Breloom gains the distinction of being a non-ground rock or steel type that effectively gets Leftovers recovery under Sandstorm. But wait, there's more. Poison Heal doesn't just give you a super healing Pokemon unafraid of Toxic, it gives you a super healing Pokemon unafraid of any status. With Poison Heal's status sponging capabilities, especially defensive Gliscor famously devours weak Scalds with aplomb. Alongside Gliscor's Spikes immunity, it is incredibly close to being a Magic Guard Pokemon, and it somehow gets even better, because as long as you have your Poison Heal activated first, you can lose your Toxic Orb to a knockoff and not care at all. Leftovers who? Now, Poison Heal works quickly and yet slowly over time, and doesn't quite match the impact of working quickly and immediately in the matter of Speed Boost. But before we get to Speed Boost, I could really use the move Rest. Luckily, this video is sponsored by Helix Sleep. Helix Sleep's mattresses are on par with some resort beds that I've slept on, and that's because this mattress was matched with me via Helix's sleep quiz. My partner and I both took the quiz, and they sent us a mattress that is perfect for us. We received the Helix Midnight. This mattress is great for me because I'm a back sleeper, as I specified on the quiz, and I also have back problems, so I can't sleep on something too soft or my body will sink too far in and hurt my back. Luckily, the Helix Midnight is the perfect firmness for my partner and I. It feels like we're lying on a cloud and we fall asleep instantly. Helix was even kind enough to send us a mattress with Glaciotech's cooling cover, which keeps us cool and comfortable while we sleep. I especially love this feature because for years I've had to deal with memory foam mattresses absorbing my body heat and the heat waking me up. Now I can safely say I do not experience that. The Helix lineup offers 20 unique mattresses, including their award-winning Luxe and Ultra Premium Elite collections. And the best part about all of this is that Helix has a 100-night sleep trial, so you get to use it for over 3 months for free to make sure you love it. So if you want the most comfortable mattresses ever and support the channel to help us produce more content, click the link in the description below to get an exclusive offer of 27% off. And thank you to Helix Sleep for sponsoring this video. If speed is almost everything, as per the Deoxys theorem, it makes sense that Speed Boost is a powerful ability. But even so, it can be a bit jarring just how powerful it is. Getting +1 speed after every turn is already excellent, but then you realize how often Pokemon are played around by switching over the course of a couple turns. Try that against a Speed Boost Pokemon and oops, you've given it +2 speed. Looks like that choice Scarfer you rely on as a catch-all revenge killer is now just as hapless as the rest of your team. Speed Boost is so horrifying, Ninjask and its later gen cousin Scolipede have consistently been insanely broken for baton passing the boost they so effortlessly accrue. Protect, Substitute, Protect again, the recipient can enjoy a +3 speed and give the hard-hitting boosts that are being passed to that can very well mean game over, as many Pokemon were not designed to be able to go so fast, and thus you are left unable to check them when they leave everything in the dust. It's not just a BP issue either. Blaziken went from living in Infernape's shadow through all of Gen 4 to becoming one of the most outrageously broken Pokemon immediately upon receiving the ability in Gen 5. Even if you initially outspeed it, 1 Protect, and that terrifying offensive onslaught is now suddenly faster than you. Arceus forbid you switch against it and its Swords Dances. +2 attack, +1 speed, soon to be +2. For the next several generations, both Blaziken and its Mega were far too strong for OU. Even non-broken Speed Boost users like Gen 8 Blaziken and multiple generations of Sharpedo were incredibly powerful for how easily and completely it transformed what would be a thoroughly unimpressive Pokemon otherwise. Sharpedo lost Speed Boost upon Mega Evolving, but would often pull the trick where it would Speed Boost in its base form, then unleash its strong jaw boosted attacks for the most terrifying assault. Speed really is so crucial, and turns out an ability that simply gives it to you just for existing is unbelievably powerful, though it'd be a shame if it were neutralized with neutralizing gas. For years, they made fun of Regigigas and its crippling, incorrigibly horrible ability. Slow start is supposed to be me before my coffee, not a legendary Pokemon. Knee slappers like that. If only it could shed the ability, all would be well, and no skill swap wasn't sufficient. It took a turn, and that was all that was needed to disrupt it. Nope, something immediate was needed. Enter Gen 8 with both Weezing's neutralizing gas. Regigigas woke up like Shaq does in the meme and immediately terrorized VGC. You can't even intimidate it because Intimidate also doesn't work under neutralizing gas, enabling such brokenness in neutralizing gas's main claim to fame, and it is a great one, but it was a superb ability in singles as well, and it's incredibly simple when you stop to think about it. Seeing as a lot of Pokemon are completely reliant on their abilities, which are indeed often game-defining, even game-breakingly excellent, if you can disrupt these abilities, you've got a major advantage. When G-Weezing first burst onto the scene, it was used to disrupt one of the broken abilities from our first video on the subject, Regenerator. Players had long bemoaned how difficult it was to break through walls when they could regenerate so much of the damage off and thus become nigh immortal tanks of repeated hits. Well, not with G-Weezing on the scene. That big hit your Toxapex took that it would normally shrug off, that damage is sticking. Even if Toxapex switches on the turn G-Weezing comes in, Toxapex is usually switching second because it's slower than most other things, especially the attackers it's switching into, and thus G-Weezing will hit the field. Neutralizing Gas will activate, and Regenerator will be denied. As a result, G-Weezing was indirectly an excellent wall breaker, or rather assistant wall breaker, literally just by virtue of switching in. It was also excellent at shutting down another busted ability, Magic Guard. It was pretty much the most ideal Clefable counter you could imagine. Turns out an ability that shuts down other abilities is pretty broken itself, but it doesn't quite threaten to burst the bubble of the next ability, which is Water Bubble. Water Bubble doesn't get a lot of attention because it's exclusive to Araquanid, well, and Dewpider, which isn't an outright terrible Pokemon. It has a few cool things it can do, in large part thanks to Water Bubble itself, but it's hardly impressive either. However, design-wise, Water Bubble is absolutely incredible. Giving this ability to many other water types would, if not break them, make them viciously good. From the obviousness of a stupefyingly scary Gyarados to the terror that would be inflicted by even the more unassuming likes of, let's say, Wailord. Water Bubble has several effects, all of them excellent, combining for a monster of an ability, whose limited distribution we should be thankful for. For starters, it doubles the power of its user's water moves, which is already astonishing, but it goes further. It also halves the power of fire moves against its user. You might think this is redundant for water types, but you can never take too little damage. Effectively going from resistant to quad resistant is a major difference. Suddenly, you're really shrugging off that Heatran Fire Blast. And as a bonus, a Water Bubble Kingdra or Water Rock type would become the most fire resistant Pokemon without an immunity. Alternatively, a water type neutral to fire, like Empoleon or Lapras, would actually become resistant. Finally, Water Bubble provides an immunity to burn. This particularly favors physical attackers, of course. It wouldn't exclusively be useful for them, but being unable to threaten a burn against that dangerous Choice Bander or Dragon Dancer is major. It makes these water types actual switch-ins to the terrifyingly limited likes of Lava Plume, Will-O-Wisp, and Scald. This effect already exists in the form of the Water Veil ability, and it's of course useful, but to combine this with the even greater resilience to fire and the stunning power boost, well, let's just hope Game Freak doesn't get the idea to slap it on something like Keldeo anytime soon. Hopefully they'll remain unaware. Quagging around in the face of arguably overpowered boosters hardly seems like it qualified for brokenness. But oh boy, were we, not aware of just how critical those boosting options were in breaking through defense until Swagsire showed up. Unaware's ignoring of opposing boosts seemed like Regenerator to be a necessary addition to allow defense to keep up against a wave of increasingly absurd offense. At first this was the case, as Quagsire almost single-handedly allowed Hardstall, or many consistent forms of it at least, to exist against the monsters of Gens 5 and 6. However, in Gen 6, Stall teams wound up more maddeningly difficult to defeat than their previous Gen counterpart, and this was largely due to how brutally Quagsire shut down such vicious sweepers, most notably the Bisharp and Mega Charizard X that crushed everything else, as well as the ever-threatening long-game threats, Swords Dance Gliscor and Mega Scizor. But it could even run Haze, which, while seemingly counterintuitive, allowed it to reset the boost of a Calm Mind Clefable or Reuniclus, allowing it to PP stall them in conjunction with a teammate, whereas they'd otherwise be severely disadvantaged. There was a point at the end of Oraz where some top players genuinely wanted Unaware banned because they found it too powerful and how uninteractive it was. No matter how well the opponent set up their threats, the unaware user could simply throw Quagsire at them. This didn't last, but unaware continued to dominate in Gen 7. Pyukumuku, a Pokemon that literally can't do direct damage, was an excellent choice on OU stall for how it ignored such major boosting threats, while Quagsire continued to quag things up. The concept of Unaware's brokenness came to a head with the stall dominance of Gen 7 UU, where the player base didn't just dislike Unaware, they despised stall as a playstyle. The thing is, they were torn over how to target it. At first, they went after that immovable special wall, Blissey, but eventually, they realized that being able to boost was a major part of threatening defense, and to be able to ignore that was too powerful. They thought about banning Unaware as a whole, but wound up just banning Quagsire. But the fact this happened at all is a testament to the absurdity of the ability. Oh, and that's not enough. Unaware allowed Quagsire to take on the comically OP Zacian Crown in Gen 8 Ubers, something no other Pokemon could do. And ignoring boost can feel OP in its own right, but it doesn't quite match the sheer power, the huge force of our next batch, Huge Power and Pure Power. We wonder why Game Freak made two of these abilities when their impact is identical, and what the distinction is. Is it just about Medicham being Zen? Anyway, Huge and Pure Power are our choices here specifically for how raw it is to simply double an attack stat. It means that even if your attack stat would normally be terrible, you're actually hitting incredibly hard. And if your attack stat even approaches average, you wind up hitting truly comical numbers. Azumaro's base attack stat is 50, which is pathetic. That's less than Piplup. It reaches a maximum attack stat of 218 with an adamant nature and full investment. However, with Huge Power, it reaches a stunning 436, which puts it miles ahead of Pokemon like King Gambit and Salamence. And if that's Azumarill, think of Diggersby with its base 56 attack. Think of Medicham at base 60. These pathetic attack stats hit staggering levels when doubled. Then when Mega Medicham hit the scene in Gen 6, it had a base attack stat of 100. You know, an actual respectable attack in its own right. When doubled, its maximum stat of 328 jumped to a staggering 656. It was one of the most stunning automatic one-hit KO machines the game had ever seen. And what's more, somehow there was an even stronger one, Mega Mawile, whose base 105 attack translated to a huge power boosted 678 attack, leaving it to perform outrageous feats like one-hit KOing Garchomp with an unstabbed +2 Sucker Punch. That was in Gen 6, before Gen 7 nerfed it from 80 to 70 base power. And back then it was stronger than Extreme Killer Arceus Stab Extreme Speed. Of course, 105 base attack is hardly even that good in its own right, but with Huge Power in Gen 6, it was enough to get Mega Mawile sent to Ubers. Of course, there are so many other crazy boosting abilities, we would dedicate a video just to them, that we'd be remiss to not mention their existence. From sheer force to adaptability to guerrilla tactics to the swords and beads of ruin to, well, you get the idea. And yet all the power in the world still manages to not be quite as conceptually insane as Purifying Salt. With its great bulk, solid typing, recover, and salt cure, Garganacl already would have been a strong defensive Pokemon, but this ability almost makes it preternaturally difficult to take down. Purifying Salt grants it immunities to status conditions. This is a wall that you can't threaten with Toxic, and not because it's steel or poison. You can't burn it, and not because it's fire. It verges dangerously close to Magic Guard in this respect, and it actually goes even further, because you can't even paralyze it or freeze it either, and if Sleep were allowed in Gen 9 OU, you wouldn't be able to do that. That's not all either. Purifying Salt effectively provides a resistance to Ghost type moves. Given how powerful or even broken Ghost types have become, most aren't going to complain about this, but the effect is achieved through brokenness in its own right. Purifying Salt bestows the resist without any of the risks of the types that actually resist Ghost. You might say, well, Thick Fat does that too, and that's true, but Thick Fat isn't also providing status immunities to its user. It may resist fire and ice, but you can still burn and poison a Thick Fat Pokemon, to say nothing of the other statuses. Garganacl has been decried many a time for how immortal it is, and yet it's not even the most broken Gen 9 Pokemon with a status blocking ability that begins with G. That would go to good as gold. When you get into competitive Pokemon, you learn that it's not all about direct damage, and those status moves you passed over on your in-game journey are not only good, but actually among the most powerful and defining of your available options. That's why Good as Gold is so good, because it completely blocks the effects of all status moves that directly target the opponent. This would already be great on a halfway decent Pokemon, but on a beast like Goldango, boasting Aegis-Slash typing alongside a tremendous move pool and stats, it is downright incredible. It's a ferocious special attacker, whether with Choice Scarf or Nasty Plot, that you can't slow down with Thunder Wave. It switches into Will-O-Wisp, and we're not just talking literal status conditions either. It blocks Taunt. Forget stifling its recover. Heck, you can't even Leech Seed it, or phase it out with Roar, or Whirlwind. Arguably the best one though is that since it can't have its stats lowered by status moves, this means the fog, which also lowers evasion, doesn't go off against it. That's right, Goldango is a thoroughly unique form of hazard protection, the ultimate form of hazard protection, as in addition to its ghost typing, letting it block rapid spin, it also blocks the fog. Finding a way to block the fog has been a dream for offensive spikes teams ever since the move's buff in Generation 6. Before, you would have to do it manually, with taunt, a faster taunt at that, or just threaten to KO the defogger first. This wasn't easy and required careful maneuvering to ensure your opponent didn't get that chance to remove your all-important hazards. If you weren't all over them, or your opponent got to step out in front, you'd be in major trouble, potentially to a game-ending extent. Plus, you still had to contend with the possibility of rapid spin. If you wanted to run a faster-paced spikes team, you had to not just have the spikes protecting tools, but to execute them in battle. That was until Gen 9, at which point you could just run Goldango and cover yourself against everything. It's never been easier to lay spikes in Gen 9, with so many ground types getting them, alongside moves like Hisui and Samurot's Ceaseless Edge. And thanks to Goldango, it's never been easier to protect them either, which in turn winds up making the hazard-assisted Goldango more threatening, and the opponent compensating by overloading on heavy-duty boots has its own drawbacks. Good as Gold completely denying so many major moves is just incredibly broken, but at least you can see that one coming, unlike Unseen Fist. Of all Game Freak's questionable design choices, this one really rattled the worlds of singles and doubles alike. Sight Unseen. Unseen Fist breaks protection moves. Most obviously, this means protect, but it also extends to its counterparts, from King's Shield to Baneful Bunker. The one exception is Max Guard, which doesn't exist in the Dynamax banned singles meta, and in doubles, do you really want to spend precious Dynamax turn guarding yourself? Urshifu is already a monstrously threatening fighting type, with good speed, outstanding attack, and perfectly complementary secondary stab. Dark is highly spammable in its own right, and the dark and fighting types that resist it don't want to come anywhere near its fighting stab, barring Buzzswole. Additionally, the psychics and ghosts that will withstand Urshifu's fighting stab are mortally terrified of the dark type stab, as are most flying and bug types. It helps that Urshifu's dark stab is Wicked Blow, which seems unimpressive at 80 base power until you realize it always crits, making it effectively 120 base power, the same as close combat, and actually making it even scarier because that means it ignores Intimidate's attack drop. Yeah, fairy types resist both stabs, but if High Dragon can work around it, Urshifu definitely can too. It even has U-turn, if it doesn't feel like poison jabbing them itself, to say nothing of how it's so strong, it threatens to overwhelm them through resist smashing power. This new age Terrakion with Scrafty stabs was already contentious before the Unseen Fist of it all. In singles, not being able to scout the intentions of a choice band Urshifu was devastating. One of the few comforts of facing the demolition experts that were new gen choice users was that at least you could scout their moves with Protect before they used them, allowing you to safely slow the hit down with the appropriate Pokemon and potentially shut them down altogether. If they wanted to get around this, they'd have to run a different item, and thus lose that searingly powerful 50% choice boost. Not so with Urshifu. It threw you right into the fire right away, and you immediately had to play those perilous metagames where, at best, you wouldn't lose a Pokemon to it yet. It's what got Urshifu banned from OU. Urshifu Rapid Strike also had the ability, of course, but its Keldeo-style offense wasn't quite as busted as the brutality of Wicked Blow, so it was quote-unquote only an amazing threat. And yet in doubles, Urshifu was even more devastating. Protect is such a fundamental part of the format, used on almost every Pokemon there is. So much of the game revolves around not letting your opponent target a certain one of your Pokemon while you deal damage with the threat. And the predictions around that. They're going to protect that Pokemon, so I won't attack it. They know I should protect this Pokemon, so I'll attack with it freely. If you want to be good at VGC, this is a skill you must master. Unless Urshifu is around, in which case you can disregard all of that and instead fear for your Pokemon on the field, left helplessly vulnerable in the face of Urshifu's onslaught. It seems an unusual choice to be considered so broken, but this ability has really had players, primarily of doubles, calling for Game Freak's metaphorical head. Being able to protect yourself from incoming damage is one of the most important strategies in Pokemon. Previously, to get around that, you had to use your incredibly specific, risky feint on the turn your opponent protected. With Urshifu, you can just blast through everything with your best attacks at any time. The worst part, if you know Urshifu is going to attack you, you're not going to bother protecting, and that leaves you vulnerable to Urshifu's teammate too. Wow, Unseen Fist sure sounds busted. What could possibly top it, you may ask? Well, thinking about these broken abilities has sure made me moody. Finally, the ability's so broken, it has its own clause in singles. At the end of each turn, Moody gives a +2 boost to a random stat, while also giving another stat a -1 drop. Fitting that its original translation from Japanese was inconsistent, as this is an ability whose brokenness is so cosmically gargantuan as to enable some of the most otherwise impossible, genuinely unreal happenings in competitive Pokemon. Back in the early days of YouTube and Diamond and Pearl Wi-Fi battles, one of the most popular micro-genres was the attempt to win against Standard or Ubers teams with something ridiculous, inspired by the time Maryland defeated a level 100 Empoleon with his Fear Rattata, and arguably peaked with the Killer Nacho sweeping a team of Ubers with a Magikarp. These were of course only possible because their opponents were 10-year-olds whose action replays that let them cheat for the non-existent Arceus didn't make up for the fact that they would also do things like attempt to defeat Salamence with Earthquake and Focus Blast. Anyway, so in Gen 5, Bidoof started sweeping Ubers. Wait, what? Yes, you heard that right. It was the competitive equivalent of the Golden Bidoof. This wasn't every YouTuber jonesing for views against clueless opponents either. This was Bidoof genuinely destroying well-built Ubers teams wielded by some of the best players in the game. That's right, it was all because of Moody. For some reason, people were having difficulty in accepting the ability as broken when wielded by quote-unquote real Pokemon like Octillery and Glalie OU. Another occurrence of the mysterious phenomenon taking place each generation where experienced players you'd think would know better suddenly become blind to outrageous brokenness that only seemed to become obvious once the culprit in question has actually been banned. Clearly, the ante needed to be upped if these players of high standards were to be impressed. Well, would you look at that? Bibarel gets this ability, and yup, now Bibarel is shredding through OU. This alone would have been enough for most players to see reason, but wouldn't it be funny, utterly hilarious, if Bidoof could do the same? Haha, let's try it out, just for kicks. Oh, would you look at that? Bidoof is sweeping OU. The Bibarel plus Bidoof combination is simply too much to handle. Hey, speaking of good ideas, wouldn't it be downright hysterical, a masterpiece of comedy with its own Netflix special, if the same thing was tried in Ubers? And that's how you got Bidoof legitimately destroying Arceus. It was very straightforward. Good opponent, good team, and yet you would flail haplessly before the ability that's so broken it had to be claused out of the game, never to return for how fundamentally, how grotesquely it warped every battle it was in. Fitting since, after all, it enabled Bidoof sweeping Mewtwo, Kyogre, and their famous trends. How did it actually work though? Doesn't the fact that it can also drop your stats be a problem? Well, theoretically yes, but is usually outdone by the fact that you're also getting a +2 somewhere else on every turn, which will outpace any temporary setbacks, especially since Moody users wielded Substitute and Protect, letting them safely sit back and wait for the outrageous boost to roll in. It's hardly even fishing since it's so overwhelmingly in their favor. Sometimes it just takes one boost to create the opportunity to sub and protect more, usually speed, since that lets you freely sub more, but it can also be evasion. That's right, it's not just offenses, defenses, and speed. Moody also affects accuracy and evasion. Even if your accuracy drops, you'll still be fine. Even if Moody doesn't boost it back up for you, your boost bulk will give you several opportunities to hit your attacks, which will also be boosted. That is, assuming your boosted evasions allow your opponent to land their attacks in the first place. After all this sub-protect spam, you get these super fast, super strong, super bulky Pokemon that could boost their evasion on top of everything else. You want to taunt them? Not if your taunt misses. Even if a stat they wanted boosted was actually lowered, sometimes it just took one protect for that stat to actually be boosted again, or one protect and one substitute. Moody is the ultimate RNG fest because it's not even about a coin flip. It so favors the user that, again, Bidoof was sweeping teams in Ubers. It legitimately rivals Wonder Guard as the most absurdly broken ability ever. After all, Wonder Guard Bidoof wouldn't be sweeping teams in Ubers. It wouldn't even sweep teams in PU. With Moody, on the other hand, Arceus quivers before its wrath. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Megamon VGC, Mojo Gameslayer, Nurse Jake, Pretzel SP, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Gylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu, Wardine for their major support of our videos.